a return to an active severe weather pattern is expected as we get to early next month, especially as we get into the middle of next week and through the first full week of September. It appears that we'll be back to a pretty active pattern for severe weather for much of the Midwest, including the northern plains and down further east down to Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin as well. But it appears to be more of a Midwest type of severe weather, I guess, pattern instead of further south down to like Kansas and Missouri in them areas. And it will probably be over pretty similar areas as we begin to start seeing large scale troughing push into to the inner plains during this time frame, which usually happens as what we call the second weather season. So I'm gonna take a look at that, the upper air pattern, and just some other I guess ideas of what we might get as we push into September that will likely provide several days of weather in a row. Taking a look at the upper air pattern, the middle of the heights, as we can see in the blue, the purple areas, we can see pretty good troughing showing up in the northwest portions of the country and southwest portions of Canada. When you have this pretty deep troughing over here for the northwest, and then you have maybe some broad ridging as you get further east, you get more of the southwest flow type of look, and you typically get pretty large scale troughing that will eject into the central and northern plains as we get into next week. This would likely again allow for a very broad warm sector because when you get this weak but broad ridging as well over the Midwest, you typically get a pretty broad warm sector, but you also get enough lower moisture that being placed to get tornadoes as well, and also the chance for a couple maybe of robust weather events. But for the time of the year, this is a pretty classic pattern to get maybe some days of more robust weather, or at least several days of weather. Once again, in a row on the edge of a weak but expansive ridge that will be in place. This is a look at the middle level winds. As we push into this weekend, we can see the first trough, I mean, a pretty big shortwave trough will eject into the northern plains this weekend and also into early next week. This will allow for a few days of weather this weekend and into early next week for the northern plains further east, also down to Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. Especially as we get to early next week, we can see the changes for some weather on the southern base of this shortwave trough. As we push into the middle of next week, we will see more troughs, potentially large-scale troughs, push in deeper into next week as we begin to see more of a, again, more big trough that could push in little next week because of the favorable upper air height pattern that we saw on the last clip, I guess, at the beginning of the video, you want to say. This would also allow for multiple more days of weather, chance for more robust weather, but you can see a very active pattern with multiple troughs, multiple shortwave troughs, and large-scale troughs that will push in over the next 2 weeks, but especially next week. And as we move into the middle of September, it appears we'll be back into a pretty active pattern for weather. Just looking at an overall, I guess, standpoint, at this range, you look at the overall upper pattern, and as we closer, you begin to look at more of the ingredients that will be in place, and some of the the more exact features that you won't know at this range. It does look like though the setups will be more of a widespread setup for weather rather than a local area. So again, those can be slightly easier, I guess, to look at in the longer range because it'll be more in a larger area as well. Dew points won't really be a concern. Maybe as we get into this weekend a little bit, but we still will have enough lower moisture in place this weekend. Now, as we push into next week, we will also have plenty of lower moisture in place over much of the Midwest ahead of these cold fronts, boundaries, or troughs that will push in. But again, you can see a consistent flow of 70 dew points will be in place throughout next week ahead of the cold front dry lines. I guess through much of the Midwest, as you can see, through the end of the period, we have a lot of lower moisture in place. Looking at the storm field that will be in place, we will have quite a bit of storm field in place with that higher lower moisture and that broad ridging that will allow for a lot of sunny skies and quite a bit of storm field will be in place throughout next week. I mean, this is pushing 5,000 joules again of storm field as we move to early September, which is pretty high, I guess, as we get into closer to fall, actual fall, you want to say. So, again, definitely a pretty big pattern for weather is possible next week. And it could be a pretty long-lasting pattern too, maybe of 7, 10 to up to 2 weeks of this pattern. Looking at, maybe the feature radar, this is a long-range model, so it's not that great looking at it, but you can see As we move to next weekend, we do see a chance for severe weather in the Wisconsin area. I guess if you want to say in the upper Midwest, you see severe weather most likely this weekend north of the I-90 corridor. But as we move to next week, the greater chances for severe weather may push further south into the Corn Belt region because it'll be on the southern base of that first trough. But the next trough will eject into the plains early to middle of next week. That will push the chances for severe weather again pretty widespread, more of a synoptic, I guess you want to say, troughs. I guess you move into early to middle into end of next week. This will allow for more of a expansive area of severe weather. If that would obviously verify, you can see the chance for severe weather from the Canadian border all the way down into Nebraska and Iowa area. So again, these events typically will be more widespread across a larger area. So they're definitely worth watching. But as we push further into next week, as we get to next weekend and everything, you still see a pretty continuous chance for severe weather as we continue. So again, a very active pattern will be coming from the Midwest for severe weather as over the next 2 weeks. Now you can't really predict the tornadoes at this range or really anything, but typically in these type of patterns you can get a better chance for tornadoes rather than a damaging wind event. Coming up, these actual large scale troughs typically would have been better chances for tornadoes rather than like a Boac or a derecho. I think we were past the peak season for derechos. You want to say? I think early to middle of August was probably the peak season for them. So again, we may be back to more of a chance for tornadoes and maybe be able to increase the tornado count. I guess you want to say before the year is over. Not just that, we will also have a divided look for temperatures as we begin to push closer to fall. You get more of these wild swings in temperatures. It looks like early the first week of September, it'll be very far above. It'll be very warm, a very warm look as we move into September, early September. But for the north, you see a pretty cold look as well. So when you have this, divided temperatures, you can see the troughs would eject into the northern plains, and then you have all this, very warm, humid air that will be in place in a very broad, warm sector because of that weak but expansive region that will be in place. So again, a pretty classic pattern this time of the year to get a very active pattern for severe weather, including a chance for tornado events as well. So again, temperatures will be about up to 10 degrees above average over a several day time frame. But as we push further, possibly as we get to the end of the first week of September, we will begin to cool down. It looks like as we get some more cold fronts. So again, it'll be very warm overall as well. So that won't be a concern. It's usually not in early September, but you can get pretty cold in early September compared to normal as well. It's happened several times in the past. I think that'll be it for this video. The chances for weather will increase this weekend, but especially next week. We're watching beginning Saturday, Sunday time frame, mostly Sunday time frame. Then as we move into next week, I do think we will have several days of weather next week as we push into September. So a very active pattern that was forecasted as we move into September. Then we may begin to see actual fall towards the end of September as well. That we'll talk about in about a week or so, depending how this upcoming active pattern will evolve.